Right, this is going to be a mega video as there's essentially 6 entire builds inside of this. So I've done my best to timestamp everything to make this as maneuverable as possible. The start is going to be things that are present in every build, just so I'm not having to repeat myself, then each individual build showcased in the middle, then the artifact towards the end, which is generally the same for the builds here, but I'll mention if there's anything I run differently for a specific build. The entire video though has been put together in such a way that it's easy for you to pick this back up at any point. If you want to watch from start to finish, or if there's one element that you know is your preference, it'll be easy to find it. On one hand, these builds are all very similar. You get in, drop a rift, then get a payoff. It's why they're all featured inside of one video, as they're almost all identical in that sense. On the other hand, they all do completely different things. You can suspend, freeze, blind, and scorch, all from class abilities and all using different elements. There's a build for every flavour of subclass, apart from Void, and they're all distinctly different in playstyle and in the effects they use. These are your timestamps. I'm labelling them under the debuffs they use rather than the subclasses, as there's multiple builds here that say use blind, for example. So if your preference is the silly green strings, burning out retinas, making ice blocks, or setting everything on fire, it's under one of these. Before you shoot off to a build though, the part I'd really encourage everyone to watch is this bit, the start, as it talks about a few things you'll see present in every build throughout the video. First of those being the Sage Protector armor set. With its 2-piece, you get 3% grenade and class energy back when landing sword hits, and with its 4-piece on guarding for just over a second, then landing a hit, for 7 seconds you get 10% extra sword damage, 100% increased sword lunge range, and the part we really care about, that 3% grenade and class energy on sword hits spikes up to 8%. This armor set is a massive engine in the build for ability regen. But in a very Destiny kind of way, these blocks of text do not do justice to what the armor can really do, because sword hits is massively generalized as to what can trigger Sage Protector. For your general weapon perks, Flash Counter, Hatchling, Incandescent, and Burning Ambition are all considered sword hits, with those last two being great for how often Scorch hits enemies, although as is the way with Scorch, it has to be originally applied by the weapon itself for it to counter sword damage. Arguably more impactful than perks though is the frame of your sword. As a general rule of thumb, if it hits a lot, it's good, and if it doesn't, it's bad. So your Vortex and Caster frames are amazing, Adaptives are okay too, as the uppercut hits multiple times, then Lightweights, Aggressives, and Wave frames all trail behind due to their lack of multiple hits. And now for the two big dogs. There are a couple of select exotics that massively push how far Sage Protector's ability regen can go, and the first of those is Prismatic Blade. Its 3 light 1 heavy attack combo is great, as its final swing counts as multiple hits, on top of the fact that the thing prints so much ammo for itself. What makes it so unique with Sage Protector though is Impact Core. Depending on your equipped super, Prismatic Blade hits will apply an elemental debuff, and specifically with the solar super, it applies Scorch, identically to Incandescent and Burning Ambition, whereas Scorch originates from a sword, it counts as sword weapon damage, so every damage tick triggers Sage Protector. While Soul is the only element that directly interacts with Sage Protector, Stasis and Arc also have some really good effects that tie in so well with their respective subclasses. Any reflected shots also count as sword damage too, which is really nice as it's another proc for Sage Protector. And Hyperblade should never come off this. Whenever you hear this sound, that should flip a switch in your brain and you immediately Foxy jump scare launch yourself into literally anything nearby and drop a rift. And if you have no rift, you're still going to do it because a quick block and a few hits later, you'll have a rift to drop anyway. Also, Amplified for any subclass is so good. Next on the list is Ergo Sum, which has 3 big things going for it. First is the fact that you have a choice of the 2 best frames in Vortex and Caster. Second is that with the Catalyst on Prismatic builds, the thing makes mountains of ammo for itself. And third, which is the real reason it's so good here, is that Ergo's exotic perks interact with Sage Protector in so many unique ways. Arc Conductor's Chain Lightning, Perfect Fifth, Telesto Bombs, Wolfpack Rounds, Insect Robots, and Sacred Flame will all trigger Sage Protector. Arc Conductor and Caster Frame Perfect Fifth are probably the best here for how many hits they're able to land, but any one of these perks alongside Vortex or Caster and your nade and rift energy is insanely quick to charge. Genuinely, as far as pure ability regen goes, these swords are uncontested even against the Praxic Blade. I'll consider those two to be the best in slot for any of the builds coming up. For some honourable mentions though, we've got 86, as it's a vortex frame and comes with the Bray Legacy origin trait, which by itself is an ability genning machine. Lament, as every revved attack counts as 3 hits, so a full combo with some really decent ability regen, especially with the 4-piece active, plus healing and damage. So for those of you who want to switch up Praxic Blade if you've been spamming that since Renegades launch, you can with this build. One thing with Blade Focus that's important to know is that switching weapons whilst the 4-piece is active will stop its effect early, even if you switch from one sword to another. So try avoid weapon swapping where you can whilst Blade Focus is active. It will hurt every one of these builds if you're not using Sage Protector correctly. And that second thing to talk about is your mod setup, which on the helmet and class across every build is the same, in double dynamo and triple distribution. As on using your class ability near enemies, these mods will give super energy. Dynamo, thanks to its 2x scaling for Warlock, gives 8% super, and distribution 4%, making a rift cast 12% of your super. You're spamming loads of class abilities, this super energy seriously adds up. For the rest of the mods, they're specific per each build, so I'll showcase each mod setup in each build zone segment. Right, I know that's a lot of stuff, and we're not even into the first build, so let's waste no time, we're talking stasis. Wait, does that say rock and metal? Okay, there's the very quick build, you got that. Cool, let's get into it. This, of everything I'll talk about here, is the sleeper pick of the list. I've even gone back on my final version of this script to add in this part so I can glaze Stasis Warlock, or the FreezyLock as I'm coining it, even more than I was before. It hits hard, spams every ability it has access to at lightning fast speeds, is extremely flexible with exotics, so you really get to tailor this build to the effects you most value, and this build is far and away the most survivable build I'll talk about in this list, if not the most survivable Warlock build I've just used in general. And I'm talking survivable like Howl of the Storm, Icefall Mantle Titans, or Spirit of Surturacne Hunters with Goldian Purpose. The thing just shrugs off damage that gets thrown its way like no one's business. Most of that tankiness comes from stasis getting changed a short while back, with shards no longer having an internal cooldown on being spawned in, which is what has enabled this build so much, as it gives you an untapped way to gain damage resist and heal. In Warlock's case, its shard aspect Glacial Harvest, which is what you're taking here, is tied to freezing enemies, which means no kills are required in order to make shards. Anytime you freeze an enemy, you make a shard. Red bars make 1, elites make 2, bosses, champs and mini-bosses make 3. Plus anytime you pick up a shard, you get 1 stack of frost armor, restore 10 HP, and get 12.5% of your melee back. This aspect in general serves as a great payoff for actually freezing things, which we'll be doing mostly through Frost Pulse, your second aspect. It's a really simple but really effective one. You drop your rift and it'll freeze enemies standing around it. Plus, whenever you freeze an enemy, and this doesn't have to be with your rift, just freeze in general, you get 11% class ability energy back. For your fragments, there's 2 I'd consider mandatory. First is Whisper of Rime, which makes Frost Armor max out at 8 stacks, and increases Frost Armor's timer to 13 seconds. Refraction's the other must-have, where on killing a stasis debuffed enemy, you get class energy back, which scales depending on enemy rank, like so. Past that, any of Conduction, Hunger, Rending, or Torment are great picks. I'm kinda lazy, so I typically run Conduction alongside Hunger, so shards float towards me and give 17.5% melee energy, but those last 2 are very much personal preference. For melee, you have no choice, it's always Penumbral Blast, and for Grenade, I really like Cold Snap as it's an instant freeze, which means I get shards and class energy right away from Frost Pulse and Glacial Harvest. Already from just this, pretty much everything the build does is laid out. You drop Rift, that'll freeze. From doing so you make shards, and for freezing you get class energy back. Shards give frost armor and healing, then you'll kill anything that was just frozen from either your Rift, melee or grenade, to get more class energy back from refraction, and the rest of the ability energy is given back from laying into something with a sword to get Sage Protector regen. The really nice thing about this build though is that almost everything for the build happens inside of your subclass. So the exotics here are massively flexible, with 3 I'll put on the pedestal as being the best, those being Ballandorse, Osmiomancy, and Vesper Radius. Ballandorse just does a weird amount of lots of random stuff, which is all of this. But the big things are that it makes Winter's Wrath Shattered deal 150% increased damage, yourself and allies get max stacks of Frost Armor when casting your Rift, and you get 2% super energy per ally buffed, and super energy is refunded on buffing allies during super with Frost Armor. That extra damage is definitely the most impactful from all the supers you'll be making through Dynamo distribution, but no longer having to build up stacks of Frost Armor gradually is nice too. Plus, it's nothing you'll directly take advantage of, but it's support for your teammates through giving them Frost Armor, which they'll appreciate. Osmiomancy here is just a complete neutral game ability spam bully. I really do mean it when I say the abilities do not stop flowing with this build. Osmiomancy gives another Cold Snap grenade, and Cold Snaps travel faster and further. Plus, whenever you deal damage to an enemy with a Cold Snap, you get fixed grenade energy back that scales with enemy tiers like so. With this version, every ability feels like it feeds into the other. Grenades freeze and give themselves energy. Melees freeze and class abilities freeze. Every freeze will make shards, which gives melee energy, and anytime you freeze, Frost Pulse's passive 11% class energy will trigger. Everything feeds into another ability and allows for just a ridiculous amount of presence and control over your fights. And lastly, the one which is probably not as expected for stasis, Vesper Radius. This exotic is the definitive class spam version of this build. Whenever you're surrounded by enemies, you'll see a massive spike in class regen. When it's 3 enemies, it's 250% increased base class regen, 4 enemies is 666%, 5 enemies is 1085%, and it maxes out at 6 with 1500% bonus regen. On top of that, when dropping a rift, it will spark out a shockwave of arc damage, which will re-trigger every 5 seconds, and anything that dies from that shockwave will explode in arc damage. If you were to have an arc super, the shockwaves and explosions would also be blinding, but in this case, we're purely using it for that extra regen. That said, the arc damage shockwaves make this really cool combo in that you drop the rift, it instantly freezes, then the shockwave goes off and shatters all of the enemies. It's one ability that both freezes and shatters, and the thing's just cool to watch go off. Okay, the gameplay of this build. This is the big one. Never be stingy with any abilities. Even after playing and testing these builds for a short while, I'm still not casting stuff anywhere close to where I could be. The more abilities that get thrown, the more class energy you get, which fuels super regen in the build, and in freezing, you keep the sustain of the build high. Don't be stingy, like ever. This is even more the case when you're using Osmiomancy. You throw grenades at slight inconveniences. In being more of a caster, it just means you can throw yourself into the thick of fights even more often, and that is where this build loves to fight. You're basically wanting to hold hands with everything you plan on smacking over the head with a sword or throwing an ability at. The closer you are, the more the build can do what it's great at. And it's so easy to fight up close, as you have an extremely consistent 50% DR, healing from stasis shards, healing rift itself, and the crowd control given through an absurd amount of freezing. This build is also one where you can very comfortably sit under bosses, and I'm talking dangerous bosses, and stay super healthy. As Glacial Harvest shard creation is tied to enemy rank, with bosses making 3, and as you can freeze so much with the build and stack healing rifts under bosses easily, you can become a real tank for your team. Plus, with Praxic Blade, you can also stack up Amplified. And speaking of, Praxic Blade is a real MVP here. It gives you access to that combo of hyperblading into groups of enemies and insta-dropping a rift, which is pure dopamine every time you do it. But with Impact Core, it's 3 light 1 heavy will freeze, and that means shards, class energy, and Sage Protector gets procced, whilst also being able to dish out some really good damage. A couple of interactions that are noteworthy here. First is that Winter's Wrath can have a bit more damage eked out of it if used in a certain way. When using the super, the bolts that get shot from the staff will be fired off in 2 bursts, but if you cancel the second burst by using the shatter attack of Winter's Wrath, it'll make that second burst not fire off and stop a chunk of super energy getting taken too. There's no real upside to double freezing an enemy with super, so whenever you're fighting specifically a boss or something like a champ, do this, it'll massively cut down on how much of your super is wasted, and therefore more damage. If you're using Winter's Wrath for ad clear, treat this like you normally would. Second thing is specific to Cold Snaps and Osmiomancy, in that the regen triggers off of damage that these do, so by smacking something on the forehead with a Cold Snap, it technically counts as Cold Snap damage and will refund energy because of it. For your weapons, again, I'd really advocate for Prismatic Blade to be your exotic. What it brings with Sage Protector, Hyperblade's Amplified, and Impact Core's ability to freeze is so hard to turn down. That said, an exception to this is if you're wanting to take Ballondors and use its stasis surges, Ergo Sum can be a nice replacement, with double stasis weapons in the kinetic and heavy. This is also one of the few builds where I'm intentionally running weapons based on what artifact weapon mods exist. Annoyingly, Freeze no longer stuns unstopped, which means I'm relying a lot on whatever I can from the artifact. In the footage, it's unstopped bow, but in the future, that'll likely change and my weapons will revolve around those mods. That being said, single shot weapons are really nice as you're spending a lot of time laying into enemies with a sword, plus anything that can cover distances that aren't up close also do wonders here and cover the weakness of this build in that it's a very up close brawly style of build. The Refurbished Sniper and Submersion are some personal favourites. For perks on these guns, just go for damage or convenience ones here. Auto loading is really nice and anything to bump up damage. You really do not need to go for anything that gives more ability regen, there's already so much coming from the kit. For your stats, prioritize super, and then get balanced stats between grenade, melee, and class. Super's the only one up push above 100, the others you're aiming for as close to 100 as possible. And for your mod setup, there are two versions that you can run. Use this one if running Prismatic Blade. I'll very commonly pair this up with the Refurbished Sniper, so both kinetic and heavy spot take advantage of surges. If you want to use Ballondors and take advantage of the stasis weapon surges, or you just want a mod setup that isn't revolved around any specific elements of gun, take this one. And that's the first build. Hopefully this converts some of you to FreezyLock enjoyers. I know for me it's such a marked improvement in enjoyable and fun gameplay over the stasis turret style of build, and it is genuinely a very, very powerful setup with both great survivability and really good damage. Anyway, from a darkness subclass to a light one, let's get into it. Quick build again, there it is. Got that? Awesome. This is a setup that I originally was skeptical of putting into this video. One, it's not a Rift build, it's a Phoenix Dive build. I know, you're gonna have to forgive me, this title is technically clickbait because there ain't no Rifts here. Secondly, when I first picked this build up, I was not finding success with it until I really got the gameplay of it down and something just clicked. From that point, it's risen to one of my favourite Warlock builds. It's aggressive, ridiculously sustain heavy, it's amazingly explosive, and it's probably one of the most closely knit builds I've made when it comes to interactions between abilities, weapons, armor sets, mods, and exotics. This is really just to say, when you pick this build up, stick with it for a little while. There is a sharp learning curve with this build. Also, this originally was going to be something completely different. I thought I really struck gold with a niche idea of using Vesper Radius, Phoenix Dive, and Helion to make using class abilities a reliable way to kickstart ignitions, only to find out that the idea had already been done, and at that point it felt like repetition rather than something original. I'll link that video down below. It's a seriously cool take on a Solar Warlock setup, and I kinda wish I was the one to get there first. If it's any consolation though, I think that this build, when played correctly, pushes the regen of class abilities and the ability to turn Scorch into ignitions even further than what Vesper was doing. Enough waffling though. The big idea here is to use Heat Rise's ability to cause Phoenix Dive to apply Scorch, alongside spamming grenades to top off that Scorch, using Sage Protector to consistently refund both grenade and class to make some of the lowest cooldown supers out there. Just quickly, I want to say that this build really relies on Ember of Solace, which makes Restoration and Radiant last 50% longer, and Ember of Ashes to apply 50% more Scorch. Reason I'm saying that now is I'm going to be using the numbers in my ability descriptions, including those 2 fragment effects, as their mandatory, non-negotiable fragments in the build. For your first aspect, heat rises. At base, this will allow you to shoot guns and abilities whilst in the air, and any kills you get up there give back chunks of melee energy depending on enemy rank. And it's no small amount. Red bars give 20% and something like a champ can give half a melee back. The interesting part though starts once you consume a grenade. In doing so, you'll let off a burst of cure ×2 for yourself and teammates and get heat rises for 15 seconds. Any airborne kills extend the heat rises timer depending on enemy rank, and whilst heat rises is active, Phoenix Dive now gives you restoration ×2 for 5 seconds and applies 60 scorch around you when landing. It does some other stuff too, like affecting your glide, but for the purpose of this build, that really doesn't matter. Your second aspect is Touch of Flame, which buffs your grenade. In this build, you're using Fusion Grenade, so even though this buffs various different grenades, the only thing you care about is that your Fusion Grenade explodes twice. Really importantly though, this grenade applies 60 Scorch and is what we're commonly pairing up with Phoenix Dive to make our ignitions. And for the exotic that ties this whole build together, drumroll please, Starfire Protocol. If you're looking at this and thinking, I've already seen a million billion Starfire builds before, I can hand on heart say this will feel nothing like any version of a Starfire setup you'll have played in the past. This exotic does a fair few things. First is that it gives you an extra fusion grenade, and you get a passive 20% bonus to your fusion grenade recharge rate. Plus, whenever standing inside of an empowering rift, well, or when radiant, weapon hits give 5% grenade energy, with a 0.4 second cooldown between triggers, and weapon final blows give 15% fusion grenade energy. Although the radiant portion of this is what we're going to be using the most. And the cherry on top, any fusion grenade final blows will fully recharge your class ability. For your melee, go Incinerator Snap. Grenade and class, you can hopefully already tell, should be Fusion and Phoenix Dive. For Fragments, Solace and Ashes I've already mentioned, so your sources of Restoration and Radiant last longer, and you apply more Scorch stacks. For the other two, you'll want Torches and Imperium. Torches gives you 12 seconds of Radiance on landing a melee hit, which is how we're keeping Starfire's Grenade Regen perk active, and Imperium lets you extend the duration of Restoration and Radiant for landing solar kills. And now, right, time for the gameplay interactions, and there is so much stuff going on. Let's talk Scorch and Grenade tech first. There are 4 main ways of scorching in this build: Phoenix Dive, Incinerator Snap, Fusion Grenades, and Praxic Blade. Of those 4, there's 2 you want to go out of your way to apply first, in Praxic Blade and Fusion Grenades, as they let you tap into entirely different effects, with Phoenix Dive ideally being used to top off Scorch to an ignition, and Incinerator being its own kind of thing as it can ignite really easily just by itself. If you apply Praxic Blade Scorch first, you're going to have Sage Protector's regen proc by those Scorch ticks. Scorch hits at around once every half a second, so consider this 6% grenade and class energy every second, and whilst Blade Focus is active, this goes up to 16% energy per second. That regen will only trigger though if Scorch is applied by Praxic Blade first. That's not the only cool tech you can use with Praxic Blade though. With Ashes, Praxic is applying 40 Scorch from Impact Core, so when doing the Cormorant combo, if you do this at max speed, you'll get an ignition from the first 3 hits thanks to Ashes, and the overhead attack leaves the target scorched. However, if you slightly delay that final overhead combo by the tiniest bit, the ignition from the 3 light attack goes off, and then all 3 hits from the overhead combo hits, applying 40 Scorch each, making another ignition. It's more damage from the Praxic Blade, but really importantly, it also gives you a way to more consistently trigger Imperium from your kinetic weapon. And to go back to the very start where I was talking about Scorch interactions, you can get some of the most stupid grenade regen chunks by piggybacking off of that interaction. Like I said at the beginning, if Scorch is applied by your sword, that Scorch counts as weapon damage, so it'll trigger Sage Protector, and for that exact same reason, it will now also trigger Starfire's exotic perk, as that procs off of weapon damage, which Scorch from your sword is, meaning you can get those 2 triggering at the same time, and paired up alongside Blade Focus, this gives some insanely good ability regen. This can be taken one step higher if using Incandescent in even a slightly advanced area. You just do the same thing, Blade Focus and get Starfire regen at the same time, and you'll get grenades back as fast as, if not faster, than what Sunbracers can do. You can genuinely push grenades that far in this build. It's just ridiculous. It's a stupid, over-the-top amount of grenades, but I'd have it no other way. You'll be making Shaxx very proud. And segueing nicely, grenades. Let's talk about them. Fusion Grenade is applying 60 Scorch, so pairing up a Fusion Grenade with a Heat Riser's Phoenix Dive or a single swing of a Praxic Blade will trigger an ignition. If you apply Fusion Grenade Scorch first though, some seriously cool interactions come of it. First is that any ignition you cause will count as grenade damage, but it's amazing in that if the ignition lands a kill, it's specifically coded as a Fusion Grenade kill and will give you a full class refund. On top of that, these fusions have the potential to chain class abilities, which for any other build wouldn't mean much, but with Dynamo distribution it allows for some insanely fast supers to be made. The main and most consistent way you'll be doing this is by playing around the second explosion of your Fusion Grenade, as both the first and second detonations count towards fully refunding your class ability. Your basic combo goes like so. Throw a Fusion Grenade, dive to the ground, the first explosion then goes off, killing something. Then you dive again, second explosion goes off and kills, then dive again. This whole thing gives a 36% chunk of super energy, and you'll get cure ×2 to keep you healthy. You can improve on this though and make the combo more consistent by also having Heat Risers active when starting the combo. This won't necessarily add any more dives to your combo, you're still maxed out at 3, but in doing so, your Phoenix Dive will now Scorch, and so long as the first Scorch applied to a target was from the Fusion Grenade, the ignition that gets triggered from that combo of Fusion Nade Phoenix Dive will refund class energy if it lands a kill. Plus, now in your combo, you'll also be getting Restoration for 5 seconds. Now's as good a time as any to mention that Phoenix Dive also has a unique interaction with Restoration. Normally, when you dive and have Heat Risers active, you get 5 seconds of Restoration. If at any point though, through Empyrean, you get Restoration above 5 seconds, and then Phoenix Dive whilst Heat Risers is active, it'll take the timer back up to the highest Restoration you've had, which is great for keeping Restoration high, especially since you've got class abilities and grenades up so often. Right, that's a fair bit of interaction stuff, so now you've got to pull it all together in your gameplay. When you're starting a fight, and I'm talking you've got a clean left side of your screen and you've got abilities to boot, start with eating a Fusion Grenade for Heat Risers, find an enemy, lob a Fusion Grenade in their direction, then Phoenix Dive in the general area of where that fusion's landed, so the Scorch adds up to an ignition. Or if you can guarantee that the Fusion Grenade will land 2 kills, you can throw it away from where you dive, then dive twice on top of closely bunched enemies to cause an ignition. For doing that, you'll kick off your Restoration timer, get an ignition, and from there, the build is basically all about keeping high uptime on Heat Risers and Restoration, whilst also keeping in Hyperblade for Amplified. Your Fusion Grenade class ability combo will be the real centerpiece of your gameplay, in that you're wanting to try do that as much as possible, as it'll massively fuel your Song of Flame regen. So you need to be genuinely looking out for moments where Fusion Grenades can lead into 2 or 3 kills to let you chain class abilities. But the moment that you begin to lose steam on abilities, and this can happen when you get into higher level content where fusions aren't always landing kills, that's where you get your sword out, block to get the 4-piece active, then lay into enemies. As after a few seconds of sword hits, you'll have pretty much both grenades back and your class to let you restart your combos. This is especially something you'd do against bosses, as Restoration is normally extended by Empyrean, but as you've got such fast cooldowns on grenades and class, you eat a grenade, Phoenix Dive, then use Sage Protector's 4-piece to chain that Restoration with more dives to let you stay on top of bosses without relying on Empyrean. And anytime they go for a big melee attack, that's just where you really quickly pull up your Praxic Guard, block the hit, and for doing so you get amplified. This also goes if you ever get too close to one of your Fusion Grenades. Praxic Blade block is so good at saving your life sometimes. I have blown myself up more times than I would like to admit from Fusion Grenades, so this thing is like a safety net in the build. Some other things to be careful for is applying Scorch, making sure it's either Fusion or Praxic that does so first, to get all of those benefits I mentioned before. A Praxic Blade hit applies 40 Scorch, Phoenix and Fusion both give 60, so any combo of those 3 together will be an instant ignition. Just quickly, if I sound a bit different, it's because I'm coming in post doing my main voiceover because I forgot two things, both of which are for Song of Flame. In Song, you can eat your grenade and give yourself and allies cure ×3 and resto ×2 for 6 seconds. You hopefully won't be doing this much if you're playing the build well, but it can be nice at times when leaving super to know you've got an on-demand healing that won't cost a class ability. And the second thing is that when leaving Song, you'll get full grenade and melee ability refreshes, but you'll kind of get an excess of ability energy, so if you melee, then animation cancel with a grenade, you can get both refunded right out of the super. Really nice for pushing just a little bit more damage and getting radiant uptime too. Anyway, back to me from before. That's about as much as I can say for gameplay, but I promise you this build took me a while to find success with it because it's such a different way of playing Warlock, so don't be discouraged if you're not finding immediate success. I was originally dying a fair bit in -30 content, and now I very confidently take this through solo GM alerts. It's really just a case of understanding the build and getting used to its eccentric way of fighting. For your guns, they can be massively flexible, but do try aim for solar. It just makes extending restoration and radiant easier, plus anything that covers long range is really nice and covers the distance that this build can't do. And look exclusively for damage and convenience perks on your guns. Special shout out to Burning Ambition for being able to combo really well with fusion nades, letting them trigger ignitions that still technically count as fusion grenades, so more class refreshes. One thing that is so nice with this build is how optimized your stats can be. Unlike Combination Blow, where you need 70 class energy for a full class refund, Starfire doesn't care in any way about your class stat. This could be at 0, and so long as you get a fusion grenade final blow, it's the entire thing back. So there's one of two very different ways I run this build. First is with high class and weapon stat. Even though that 0 to 100 range doesn't have any big impact in the build, the 100 to 200 range is really impactful for giving you a 40 HP overshield when using your class ability. This isn't needed survivability in the build, there's already plenty from just the build itself, but it allows for even more aggression and just gives that bit more of a safety net. Plus, Specialist Armor gives weapon as its second stat, which is nice for giving more ammo when you have above 100. The other way though is fully ignoring the class stat, running it at 0, and investing everything into grenade and super. The harder grenades hit, the more likely they are to kill, so the more class abilities you get, which means more supers, and the more supers you have, the more that 100 plus in the super stat does. TLDR, you're either doing grenade, super, weapon, melee, or class, weapon, grenade, super. Your mod setup is double dynamo on the helm, arms is 1 bolstering detonation, double firepower, chest is double melee damage resist, and 1 charged up, legs is double kinetic surge or double solar surge, depending on what weapons you want to be hitting harder in the build, stacks on stacks, class is triple distribution. Hopefully for those of you who are solar inclined and like the pseudo immortality that restoration ×2 and amplified gives, this will scratch that itch of both being aggressive and high damage, but also being survivable and doing something very unique with Warlock's kit. Right. Time for the silly strings one. This is the first of the builds on the list that's got double subclasses, as you can use this for both Strand and Prismatic. These are the hard crowd control builds of the video. You're really putting enemies into timeout with these ones, and setting yourself up for very easy kills against the things that you fight. So your very quick builds. Here's your Strand one, a little longer, and there's your Prismatic one. You got all them? Sweet. Let's start with your exotic. Daimos Fusion is where all of our suspension is coming from in both builds. When you cast your Rift, anything nearby will be suspended, and whenever you land a kill against a suspended enemy, you restore 15 HP. On top of that, whilst an enemy is suspended, they take damage over time that steadily increases. Each tick of damage will restore 5 HP per enemy, and as these ticks trigger really frequently, this can add up to some solid healing if used on groups of enemies. Only caveat is that you have to have a Strand super equipped in order to get these effects to trigger, which at the moment is only Needlestorm. And that is about the only thing that these builds share. So let's do Strand first. Your first aspect is Weaver's Call, which makes it so that whenever you cast your Rift, you'll send out 3 Threadlings and any perch Threadlings too. Plus, on dealing a set amount of damage, you'll get a perched threadling, and for landing kills, you'll progress a counter that gives you a perched threadling, with every kill progressing you 1/3 of the way towards a threadling. Whenever threadlings deal damage, it gives you 10% class energy back, so if one threadling was to say jump into 3 enemies that are closely bunched, it'd be 30% class energy back. This combo of Weaver's Call alongside Daimos Effusion is the beating heart at the center of the Strand build and how you're suspending so much. And Weave Walk, your second aspect, is really here to just support that combo. It's an air move, and whenever you activate it, you'll eat a small chunk of melee energy and start to passively drain melee energy too. For doing so, you'll enter what's effectively invis, where enemies will fully ignore you, and during Weave Walk you get a massive 90% damage resist. How this ties in with Weaver's Call is that you'll be making perched threadlings every half a second, and on top of that, depending on how long you spend inside Weave Walk on exiting it, you'll give yourself and allies Woven Mail. Generally, half a melee charge is 5 seconds of Woven, a full charge is 10 seconds, and 2 charges is 20 seconds. The idea here is to use Weave Walk's threadlings and ability to give Woven Mail to let you get really up close to enemies, drop a rift, and then have really short cooldowns between rifts. For the other stuff in the kit, melee can only be Arcane Needle, and super can only be Needle Storm, and rift should always be healing. Fragments of Warding, Mind, Continuity, Evolution, and Fury. Warding is another way of getting Woven Mail in the build, where you'll get 5 seconds of it on picking up an orb. Importantly though, this doesn't extend any Woven Mail timer you get from Weave Walk, but having just another source of Woven Mail is really nice. Evolution is here to bump up the damage of threadlings by 33%, plus they travel slightly faster and further. Mind gives class energy back on killing suspended targets, which scales up slightly depending on enemy rank, but at base will always be a 10% return with a 1 second internal cooldown on triggering. Continuity will cause Strand debuffs to last around 50% longer, which in this build means an effective damage bump to Daimos Effusion suspend damage, and the last is Fury, where dealing damage with tangles will give melee energy back. And now the Prismatic version. You're using the tried and true Feed the Void. Land an ability kill, you get Enhanced Devour, which doubles healing to 140 HP per kill, and doubles grenade energy given by Devour. Then your second aspect is Lightning Surge. You slide, melee, and you'll blip forward and cool lightning down and jolt enemies, which makes you amplified, and for each enemy it hits, you'll get a stack of bolt charge. This aspect is so good for a couple reasons. It's an amazing way to close the gap between enemies. You slide in, cover a good distance, and can instantly drop a rift and suspend. Secondly, this is really solid AoE damage between what the melee does itself and then the jolt it applies, and being able to do this against suspended enemies makes the combo feel really good and a lot more lethal. For your other abilities, Rift should always be Healing Rift and Super's got to be Needle Storm. For your fragments, you'll want Purpose, Protection, Dawn, Dominance, and Hope. Purpose give 5 seconds of Woven Mail on picking up an orb. Protection is really nice in that this build is super brawly, so it's surrounded by enemies quite a lot, meaning that 15% DR is almost always active. Dawn is giving Radiant on melee hits, and Hope gives up to 60% bonus class regen for having elemental buffs active, which you'll have at any given time through Woven Mail, Devour, Radiant, and Bolt Charge. Right. Gameplay tips. For the Prismatic variant, its gameplay is relatively simple to pull off. You're getting in with either Lightning Surge or Praxic Blade's Hyperblade Lunge, dropping a rift to suspend and following up on those rifts with more AoE from Jolt, more Lightning Surges, and Grenades. Once you're actually in a fight, and if you're using the tools of the kit well, you are surprisingly tanky. You've got Healing Rift, Woven Mail from Purpose, Daimos Effusion's Healing, Amplified, Devour, Protection, and at times Transcendence's damage resist too, plus Suspension to stop enemies outright from fighting. Where you do need to be careful though, is moving in between where you place rifts. The way to kind of think about your fights is that you're moving from spot to spot, staking a piece of ground as yours, fighting in it, then moving off once you're done. It's in between doing that where you're at your weakest, so be careful when you do have to move, and use movement tools like Lightning Surge and Sword Block to stay safe. Strand has that very similar feel. You move from point to point, plant your feet in a rift, fight, and then move. The big difference is that it is so much safer from what is essentially invincibility from Weave Walk, and that's how you really want to play your fights. You hop in Weave Walk, make 5 threadlings, use Rift, which you can from inside of Weave Walk, and then that'll suspend everything around you, you get woven mail, and you have back almost an entire rift from Weaver's cool threadling damage. And from there, you just rinse and repeat that combo. If at any point you lose rift energy, just work in Sage Protective 4-piece, and you'll have a rift and a grenade back in a few seconds. That said, you do need to be careful with Weave Walk, as it's not just some unlimited resource. It's tied to your melee, so you never really want to burn arcane needles when you don't need to, and really try and make sure that you're keeping your melee charges around 3 to 2. Arcane Needle has varying cooldowns depending on how many charges you have, so keeping this higher means you've got much less downtime on Weave Walk. Fury is going to be the big way you get melee energy back in the build, but this will give significantly different energy back depending on how many charges you have, so it's really worth keeping needle charges high. It'll make you feel much more survivable. Also with Strand, your super is basically guaranteed to be a full class refund as it makes threadlings, so you can spend a rift before super and you'll get one back really quickly. For weapons, the Strand version loves Praxic Blade, and so does Prismatic, but Ergo Sum on Prismatic also works extremely well. As long as you've got a good ammo efficient sword, you'll be golden. With these builds though, they care much more about having a good attrition orbs gun than anything else. More orbs means more woven mail from purpose and warding. Otherwise, Hatchling is great here as it can speed up class regen even more from making threadlings, and Slice is also a great perk for giving the build Sever, especially the case with Prismatic and Ergo Sum, where you'll lose out on Sever given from the impact core of Praxic Blade. Like the other builds too, single shot stuff is really nice considering how much of the time you'll be using your swords and how smoothly they can be worked into your gameplay. For your stats, there's one of two ways to run this, either going fully into class and weapon stats. It'll give you an overshield for using your class ability, and ideally this is at 200, so it's a 40 HP overshield, and with high weapon stats, you'll really be able to spam a load of ammo inefficient weapons and get away with it from ammo bricks having a chance to contain higher amounts of ammo with weapon stat over 100, then prioritize having melee, grenade and super just be at okay levels. Or you can go for a generally broad setup that has good stats in class, melee, grenade and super. In that priority, focus on getting them all as close to 100 as possible. For your mod setup, I use two separate versions for both Strand and Prismatic. For Strand it's this, and Prismatic it's this. The main reason for the difference is that Lightning Surge is really lethal, so can rely on using heavy-handed. Kinetic Siphon on the helmet and the Surge mods can be switched to your preferred element. I just really like the combo of Refurbished Sniper and Praxic Blade, both being damage boosted. Right, from one crowd control heavy build to another, let's talk arc stuff. Another double whammy with Arc and Prismatic, and what good builds these are. I would probably put the Arc build's strength and ability to get faster clears and content higher than that of its Prismatic counterpart. You don't even have to try that much with Arc, and it's just insanely good. It crowd controls at any distance, has some of the most consistent sustained damage a build can offer, has extremely consistent healing for an Arc build, AoE is a ridiculous amount, and is so satisfying to pull off from how many lightning strikes you cool down on anything that so much exists in the same postcode as you. That said, I don't want to downplay the strength of the Prismatic build, as that's also extremely crowd control heavy when it gets out close, has really good healing, and turns you into a real tank. It's by far the most tanky Prismatic Warlock build I've played to date. For your quick builds, there's your Arc one, you got that, amazing, and for your Prismatic one, you're using this, you got it? Alright, let's go. I'll kick it off with Arc, because the pure joy this build gives me of being able to spread around as much jolt as this one does, all whilst dishing out some insane amounts of bolt charge and being able to crowd control from any distance, makes this not only a really offensive and high sustained damage build, but one that slides into about any piece of content. Overloads, jolts, unstopped, blind, barriers, Praxig, healing rift keeps your health high, amplified and Praxic Blade block means you're not taking damage as much, and crowd control to stop fights from even happening in the first place all come together to make a real monster of a build. This setup is using buddies and turrets. Our turret and first aspect is Ionic Sentry. On landing kills you charge up a bar, weapon kills give 1 charge, ability kills 2, And once it's charged, you get the sentry, which is thrown out like a grenade, and for all intents and purposes is coded identically to one for stats, perks, and fragments. And it feels so nice to say that if you know my history with this thing specifically. Anyway, once it lands, it blinds enemies in an area around it, and as soon as it's thrown, it'll be set on a 6-second cooldown where no kills will give any charges towards another sentry. Once it's landed, it'll start to shoot out lightning that can chain between enemies, maxing out at 2 enemies hit. Plus, every time this hits an enemy, you get a stack of bolt charge. And the buddy that we've got sat on our shoulder is Arc Soul. You cast your Rift and become the proud parent of a little guy for 15 seconds, and so will your allies whenever they walk through a rift. The little dude shoots out arc bursts, and the rate at which it shoots speeds up when amplified. Plus, whenever near teammates you get bonus class regen of 40%, scaling up to 120% when near through teammates. These two aspects make you feel like a small artillery. The turrets that you make and the buddies will be pushing out so much passive damage, but also do it without you having to put any effort into them, which lets you act freely in pulling off the up-close fights this build gets into with swords. For your other abilities, Flashbang and Ball Lightning. Flashbang is quite flexible here, but I really like how much blind I can access when using this, and how it lets me crowd control from afar, which makes moving up into groups of enemies easier. Otherwise, Storm or Pulse are really good picks too. Your Rift should be healing, it's how we're alive most of the time. Your super is quite flexible, but Chaos Reach is what I'd recommend. This build's neutral game is already so good that going into Storm Trance as opposed to using Praxic Blade and your other abilities actually feels more like a nerf to your kit than actually something that is useful. For your fragments, you've got 4, but there is one that takes the cake for being far and above the best in Spark of Shock. This makes every single grenade in the build apply Jolt, which we technically have 3 of. Every Arc Soul hit Jolts, every Ionic Sentry hit Jolts, and your base grenade too. Which means these abilities now become AoE machines and absolutely victimize any overload that looks in your direction or stands in the general presence of a sentry. For the rest of your fragments, take Spark of Resistance, Frequency, and Amplitude, Beacons or Ions, with Magnitude being a pick if you want to sub out Flashbang. Resistance is a 25% DR when surrounded by 3 enemies, which this build is a lot of the time, and Frequency on landing a melee hit does this, but the part that you really care about is that every time you gain a stack of Bolt Charge whilst amplified, another is added on top. So every Praxic Blade swing now gives 2 Bolt Charge stacks, with that final hit giving 5 stacks at base, so a full Bolt Charge Lightning Strike immediately, and this is so good to pair up with Ionic Sentry too. Beacons is then there for more blind, making Arc Special and Heavies on landing final blows whilst amplified have a little blinding explosion. Amplitude literally just makes an orb on 2 rapid kills whilst you have amplified, with a 10-second cooldown and triggering, and Ions makes an Ionic Trace on killing jolted enemies or landing Bolt Charge kills with a 10-second cooldown in between. A Magnitude will just make Pulse and Storm Grenade last a little bit longer. And lastly for the Arc build, the exotic that you're taking is Vesper's Radius. Whenever you're surrounded by enemies, you'll see a spike in class regen. When it's 3 enemies, it's 250% increased base class regen, 4 enemies is 660%, 5 enemies is 1085%, and it maxes out at 6 with 1500% bonus regen. Plus, when dropping a Rift, it'll spark out a shockwave of arc damage which will re-trigger every 5 seconds, and anything that dies from the shockwave will explode in arc damage, with the shockwaves and explosions blinding enemies nearby. That segues very nicely to Prismatic, as we're also using Vesper in this version. Kind of. We're using the Spirit version of this, which is identical to its base version, apart from you no longer get the bonus class regen on being surrounded, and enemies won't explode from the Rift. But the pulses of arc damage and blind is all still there. Nice bonus of using the class item though, is that you now have another exotic perk to pair up with Vesper, which can be one of 2 perks, in either Spirit of the Stag, which is a really simple effect, whilst you're stood in a Rift, you get a 25% damage resist, or Spirit of the Assassin, where powered melee final blows and finishes make you invisible. If you watch the Strand build just before this, I like Assassin for the exact same reason I like Weavewalk, in that it makes moving in between where you place rifts entirely risk-free, and that is where you're most vulnerable with this build, so having something that removes that risk in invisibility is extremely nice. I do also want to say that if Spirit of the Filament ever gets changed to just be any rift and not be tied specifically to empowering, that'd be a genuinely good pick here and allow you some really cool aspect switches. But until that day, stick with the two I've just mentioned. Now, an unfortunate part of Spirit of Vesper is that if you want blind, you need to have an Arc Super equipped, which can only be Stormtrance. It's a shame that you have to use an Ad Clear Super in a build that already does Ad Clear so well, but it's got to be done for the blind and it's really worth it for just that. For your aspects, it's going to be Feed the Void and Lightning Surge. Feed the Void is Enhanced Devour on landing ability kills, which gives double grenade energy and 140 healing over base Devour, and Lightning Surge lets you turn your melee into an electric slide that gives bulk charge depending on how many enemies it hits, and amplify for just using the thing, plus it'll jolt any enemy that gets hit by the lightning. Arcane Needle is your melee as it comes with 3 charges for more surges, and your grenade can be very flexible here. Healing Rift is a muster. For Fragments, you're wanting Hope, Storm, Protection, and those last 2 spots are very flexible depending on the way you want to run the build. If you want Storm or Vortex Grenade, take Dominance, and if you want Praxic Blade, take Grace. Otherwise, it's really a la carte, pick the ones that you want. Hope is a 60% increased class regen whilst you have elemental buffs. Dawn is Radiant on landing melee hits, which is nice with how spammy Lightning Surge is, and Protection is a 15% DR when surrounded. And gameplay tips. Let's talk Prismatic first. Lightning Surge here is an amazing tool for closing the distance on enemies. The one thing this build can't do that its Arc counterpart does really well is blind from a distance, making moving up and getting Vesper's blind off much easier. So you're really relying on Lightning Surge here as your way to close gaps and get rifts off in the face of whatever you're fighting. This build feels a lot like the Strand one, where you stake out a piece of ground with a rift, fight in that spot until there's nothing else you can fight, then move along to the next spot, drop another rift, rinse and repeat. Stag and Assassin mix this up a bit, where once you drop a rift, you can face tank some stupid amounts of damage, and Assassin is slightly less tanky, but means moving from place to place becomes much easier, which is genuinely the riskiest part of this build. The only other thing to mention with this build is Stormtrance, which is straight doo-doo. You use this thing for Ad Clear and that is it, because trying to take out any enemy that has the slightest amount of health genuinely will send you to sleep with how long this super takes to kill anything. And for Arc, this build really hasn't got many layers to it. Use long distant blinds in Center and Flashbang, then close the gap and use Vesper to keep stuff blinded. The abilities in this build kind of just play themselves, so you don't have to think about much apart from bonking stuff over the head with Praxic Blade. With the Arc version though, do try to get up in the thick of fights, as the more you do, the more you'll benefit from Vesper's surrounded regen, which can lead to a load of rift stacking and supers through dynamo distribution. Weapons in both these builds are flexible, but if you're using beacons, take an Arc Special and Heavy to tap into more blind. I seriously cannot recommend Praxic Blade enough in the Arc version. The amount of bolt charge you can stack alongside frequency makes your single target damage feel so consistent, and it's so cool to watch lightning strikes come down on a target as much as it does with frequency and amplified. Otherwise, Ergo Sum is a great pick, but you will then need some good dark damage weapons so you're not completely one-sided in filling your Transcendence bar. For your stats, with Arc, I always try to get a grenade stat as high as possible, as Sentry, the little Arc buddy, and your base grenade all get damage buff by having high grenade stats. Past that, I then try to get high class, super, the melee. With the Prismatic version, try to go for much more balanced stats. Over-investment in any stat here never really felt all that impactful, so just having better regen across the board is good. For your mod setup, take double Dynamo on the helm. If you're using Prismatic, take 1 Focusing Strike and double Heavy-Handed, and on Arc, take 1 Bolstering Detonation and double Firepower. Chest is double melee damage resist and 1 charged up. Legs is double surges for whatever element you have most commonly on your weapons. Stacks on stacks. Class is triple distribution. And that about wraps up all of the builds. And the very last thing on the agenda, if you're watching this and it's not Renegades, you can skip ahead to here. Otherwise, let's talk artifact mods. At the minute, every single one of these builds are so primed to take advantage of the artifact, as there is so much good sword stuff here. First up, every build uses a few similar mods. Elemental Siphon, Kinetic Synthesis for any build using Praxic Blade, and Sword Storm combo, which on doing a light, heavy attack with a sword, makes some spinning blades around you that disorient and deal damage. Although the big thing, at the minute, every build in the game can access Devour from a combo of Power of Pain, Singularity Blade, and Void Infestation. Power from Pain gives Devour on killing 3 weakened targets rapidly. Singularity Blade makes it so that whenever you have a Void buff, sword and melee hits apply Weaken, and sword and melee final blows trigger a Weakening burst, and Void Infestation makes Void Seekers spawn from where a weakened enemy dies, with Seekers themselves then weakening. Pretty much, all you have got to do from there is run a Repulsor Brace weapon with Destabilizing Rounds, Demoralize or Withering Gaze, and you have got baked in Devour in any build in the game. So in the Arc and Strand versions, absolutely run this full mod package with at least one Void Gun to get Devour. Solar's an iffy one, as you'll want Solar Guns to play off Imperium, but if you're comfortable pulling off that build with just one Solar Gun and a Void one, it can be used there too. For your Prismatic variants, you don't need Power from Pain, but Singularity Blade and Void Infestation absolutely do take. Also worth mentioning that Arc and the 2 Prismatic builds have got an amazing mod in Dielectric, which gives you bulk charge on killing Arc debuffed enemies, and rapidly killing Arc debuffed enemies spawns in a chunky 7% super energy orb, and heals you for Abyss of Health. The other builds can just take Armorsmith for 100% increased melee damage and 10% DR when breaking a shield for 6 seconds. And that is the many ways to RiftLock. I really do hope this is something you enjoyed. It's taken me a long time to get this together, but these builds I really wanted to spotlight for their very unique, non-traditional ways of playing Warlock. For now though, I'm off to try something very cool I've been theory crafting for Titans. That is about it from me though. See ya!